The snow fell in fierce, unrelenting sheets across the Utah winter landscape as Tabitha Brookfield fled her father's house, each desperate footstep sinking deep into the fresh powder, leaving a trail that marked her escape like a desperate confession written across the pristine white canvas of the night. Alta, Utah Territory, 1878. The bitter cold bit through Tabitha's thin cloak as she stumbled forward, her breath forming clouds that disappeared into the darkness. Her father's angry shouts had faded behind her, but the memory of his rage lingered, as fresh as the bruise forming on her cheek. She was 20 years old now, old enough to make her own decisions, old enough to refuse the marriage he had arranged to the aging mine owner who had offered a handsome sum for her hand. "He'll give us security," her father had insisted earlier that evening, his fist pounding the dinner table, making the plates jump. "Jeremiah Stone has more money than anyone in Alta. You'll want for nothing." "Except happiness," Tabitha had whispered, instantly regretting her words when she saw the familiar darkening of her father's expression. "Happiness," he'd sneered. "Is that what your mother sought when she abandoned us? Happiness is a fool's errand, girl." She hadn't meant to talk back further, but something inside her had finally broken. "Mother didn't abandon us. She died because you worked her to death in that miserable house, never letting her see the sun, never." The slap had come swift and hard, sending her stumbling against the wall. That was when she knew. She couldn't stay another night under his roof, not with the wedding to Jeremiah Stone planned for the coming weekend, not with the life sentence that awaited her. Now, trudging through the snow, Tabitha realized she hadn't thought this through. Alta was a mining town, small and isolated, especially in winter. Where could she go? The nearest town was miles away, an impossible journey in this blizzard. Already, her fingers were growing numb and her thin boots were soaked through, but she couldn't go back. Anything, even freezing to death in the mountain wilderness, would be better than returning to her father and the fate he'd chosen for her. Miles away, at the edge of town, Kieran Dawson sat in the warmth of the Alta saloon, nursing a whiskey as the blizzard raged outside. At 26, he'd seen enough of the world to know that a man needed to be careful on nights like this. The mountain could kill you faster than any gunslinger and with less mercy. "Heading back to your place tonight, Dawson?" the bartender asked, wiping down the counter. "Weather's turning fierce." Kieran nodded, draining his glass. "Cattle need tending, storm or no storm." "You're a stubborn one. Got that from your pa." Kieran offered a small smile but said nothing. His father had been gone 3 years now, leaving him the modest ranch just outside of town. It wasn't much compared to the larger spreads further south, but it was his, free and clear. The cattle gave him enough to live on, and he supplemented his income by breaking horses for the miners and doing odd jobs during the lean months. "Night, Tom," Kieran said, dropping coins on the counter and pulling his heavy coat tighter around his broad shoulders. The blast of frigid air that greeted him made him instantly regret leaving the saloon's warmth. His horse, Shadow, stomped impatiently where she was hitched, her dark coat already dusted with snow. "I know, girl," he murmured, patting her neck. "Let's get home." They moved slowly through the darkened town, past the shuttered general store and the silent mining office. Most of Alta's residents were either in the saloon or wisely tucked into their homes. As they reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to the vast white expanse beyond, Shadow suddenly nickered and stopped, her ears pricking forward. "What is it?" Kieran asked, following the horse's gaze. That's when he saw them footprints, small and clearly fresh, heading out into the wilderness. Someone had left town on foot, heading away from the safety of buildings and people, straight into the deadly embrace of the mountain blizzard. "Damn fool," he muttered, but something about those footprints, their size, their desperate irregularity made him pause. They weren't a man's prints. They were too small, and there was something in the pattern that spoke of panic, not purpose. A cold dread settled in his stomach. There was only one reason a woman would flee into a night like this: desperate fear of something worse than freezing to death. Without hesitation, Kieran turned shadow to follow the trail. Whatever drove someone out into this storm had to be serious, and he couldn't leave them to die. Not when he could help. The tracks led away from town, but not toward the pass that would take a traveler to the next settlement. Instead, they wandered erratically, as if the person had no destination in mind beyond escape. In some places, the freshly falling snow had already begun to fill them in, making them harder to follow. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, he spotted a dark shape ahead, huddled at the base of a pine tree. As shadow carried him closer, the shape resolved into a woman curled into herself, her dark cloak dusted with snow. "Hello," Kieran called, dismounting quickly. "Madam, can you hear me?" The figure stirred slightly, raising her head. Her face was pale as the snow around her, lips tinged blue with cold. "Go away," she managed through chattering teeth. "Please, just leave me." "I can't do that," he said firmly, kneeling beside her. "You'll die out here." As he brushed snow from her shoulders, he recognized her: Tabitha Brookfield, Harold Brookfield's daughter. He'd seen her in town occasionally, always quiet, always hurrying to complete her errands under her father's watchful eye. "Miss Brookfield," he said gently, "I'm Kieran Dawson. I have a ranch not far from here. Let me help you." Her wide, fearful eyes met his. "I see can't go back to town. I won't." "I'm not taking you back to town," he assured her, "just somewhere warm." For a moment, she seemed to consider refusing, but another violent shiver racked her body and reason prevailed. "All right," she whispered. Kieran helped her to her feet, but she swayed dangerously, her limbs stiff with cold. Without asking permission, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to Shadow, who stood patiently in the swirling snow. "I'll sit behind you," he explained, helping her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. "Lean back against me. You need the warmth." Tabitha was too cold to protest. As they began moving through the darkness, Kieran kept one arm wrapped firmly around her waist, holding her steady. He could feel her shivering against him, and he urged Shadow to a faster pace. The ranch was another 15 minutes away, and every minute counted in cold like this. By the time they reached the modest cabin that served as the heart of the Dawson ranch, Tabitha was barely conscious, her head lolling against his chest. Kieran dismounted quickly and lifted her from the saddle. "Stay with me, Miss Brookfield," he said firmly as he carried her to the door. Just a little longer. Inside, the cabin was dark and cool, but protected from the wind. Kieran laid Tabitha gently on the sofa before rushing to stoke the banked fire in the stone fireplace. As flames began to lick at fresh kindling, he turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. Her skin was alarmingly pale, her fingers and lips blue-tinged. Frostbite was a real concern. Acting quickly, Kieran removed her snow-soaked cloak and boots. Her dress beneath was damp as well, but he hesitated, aware of the impropriety. "Miss Brookfield," he said loudly, trying to rouse her. "Tabitha, I need to get you warm and dry. Your clothes are wet." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them for a moment before recognition dawned. "Mr. Dawson, call me Kieran. Listen, your dress is soaked through. You need to change." A faint blush colored her cheeks despite her chilled state. "I don't have anything else." "I'll find something for you," he promised, moving to a trunk where he kept his few spare clothes. He pulled out a clean flannel shirt and a pair of wool trousers that would be too large but would serve the purpose. "They'll be big, but they're dry. Can you manage on your own?" She nodded weakly. I think so. I'll give you privacy, he said, placing the clothes beside her. I need to see the shadow anyway. Call if you need help. Outside in the barn, Kieran quickly unsaddled Shadow and rubbed her down, making sure she had fresh hay and water. All the while, his mind raced. What had driven Tabitha Brookfield to flee her home in the middle of a blizzard? He'd heard rumors about Harold Brookfield that he was a harsh man, especially since his wife's passing years ago. But whatever had happened tonight must have been severe. When he returned to the cabin, he knocked softly before entering. "Miss Brookfield." "You can come in," she called, her voice stronger than before. She sat on the sofa wrapped in the quilt he kept there, his clothes engulfing her slender frame. Her chestnut hair had come undone from its pins and fell in damp waves around her shoulders. The color had returned to her cheeks, though her eyes remained guarded. "How are you feeling?" Kieran asked, moving to put a kettle on the stove. "Warmer," she admitted. "Thank you for finding me." He nodded, measuring coffee grounds into a pot. "Do you want to tell me why you were running away in the middle of a blizzard?" Tabitha's eyes dropped to her hands, which clutched the quilt tightly. "My father arranged for me to marry Jeremiah Stone. The wedding was to be this Saturday." Kieran frowned. "Stone must be 30 years your senior." 40, actually," she said with a bitter smile. "But he's wealthy and my father. He sees me as property to barter." The kettle began to whistle, and Kieran poured the boiling water into the coffee pot. "And you objected to the match." "I refused," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Father was displeased." Kieran turned to face her, noticing for the first time the purplish mark blooming on her cheekbone. Anger flared in his chest, hot and sudden. "He struck you." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "It wasn't the first time, but it will be the last. I'm not going back." Kieran poured 2 mugs of coffee and brought one to her. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted, accepting the steaming mug with grateful hands. "I hadn't thought beyond escaping. Perhaps I can find work in another town as a teacher or a seamstress." "Not in this weather you won't," Kieran said practically. "The pass will be closed for weeks with this snow." The reality of her situation seemed to dawn on Tabitha then, and her shoulders slumped. "I have nowhere to go." Kieran considered for a moment before speaking. "You can stay here until the weather clears. I have a small spare room. It's not much, but it's clean and warm." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. I can't in good conscience send you back to a man who would strike his own daughter, nor can I let you try to cross the mountains in winter." He offered a small smile. "Besides, I could use the company. The cattle aren't much for conversation." A tentative smile touched her lips. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said firmly. "Now drink your coffee. I'll make us something to eat." As Kieran moved about the kitchen, pulling out bread, cheese, and some dried meat, he was aware of Tabitha watching him. There was something vulnerable yet determined in her gaze that stirred something protective in him. Whatever came next, he knew he'd made the right decision bringing her here. "Thank you," she said softly when he handed her a plate. "Not just for the food, but for following my footprints. I don't think I would have survived much longer out there." "Anyone would have done the same," he said modestly. "No," she replied with certainty. "They wouldn't have. Most people in Alta do what's easy, not what's right." As they ate in companionable silence, the wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows. But inside the cabin, warmth bloomed not just from the crackling fire, but from something new and unexpected taking root between 2 souls who had found each other on the coldest of nights. Morning arrived with piercing clarity, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the night. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Tabitha awoke slowly. momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings of the small bedroom where Kieran had installed her the previous night. The events of the past day rushed back her father's rage, her desperate flight into the storm, and the cowboy who had followed her footprints and saved her life. She sat up, wincing as her muscles protested. The borrowed clothes were still enormous on her frame, but they were warm and clean, smelling faintly of pine and open air. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Miss Brookfield, are you awake?" "Yes," she called, hastily smoothing her tangled hair. "Please come in." Kieran entered, already dressed for the day in worn denim and a flannel shirt, his dark hair slightly damp as if he'd just washed. He carried a steaming mug which he offered to her. "Coffee," he explained. "I've been up for a while tending to the cattle." "What time is it?" she asked, accepting the mug gratefully. "Nearly 9. You needed the rest." She took a sip of the strong coffee, letting it warm her from within. "I should help you with your chores. It's the least I can do." Kieran shook his head. "You're still recovering from the cold. Besides, the morning work is done." "Still," she insisted, "I won't be a burden. I can cook, clean, whatever you need while I'm here." A small smile touched his lips. "All right, but today just rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to start earning your keep if that's what you're worried about." Her cheeks flushed. "It's not that. I've never been idle. Father believed idle hands were sinful." Something darkened in Kieran's eyes at the mention of her father. "Well, I believe that helping someone doesn't create a debt. But if you're determined, I won't stop you from helping around the place when you're feeling stronger." Tabitha nodded, studying him over the rim of her mug. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. He was handsome in a rugged way, with intelligent green eyes and a strong jaw softened by the hint of kindness in his expression. She'd seen him in town occasionally, but had never spoken to him before last night. "Your father will come looking for you," Kieran said suddenly, his tone gentle but matter-of-fact. She tensed, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Yes, when he realizes I'm not coming back. What do you want to do when that happens?" It was a fair question, and one she'd been too panicked to consider properly before now. "I won't go back," she said firmly. "Not to him, and certainly not to marry Jeremiah Stone." "Alta is a small town," Kieran warned. "It'll be hard to hide here." "I know. But I can't leave until the weather clears." She looked up at him, sudden worry creasing her brow. "Unless you're asking me to go, I understand if this puts you in a difficult position." Kieran shook his head decisively. "No, you're welcome here as long as you need. I just want you to be prepared. Your father has influence in Alta. Because he controls most of the miners' housing," she acknowledged bitterly. "But he doesn't control you. No, he doesn't." There was quiet pride in Kieran's voice. "This ranch may not be much, but it's mine, free and clear. No debts to anyone in Alta." Tabitha felt a surge of admiration. Independence was a rare commodity in a town where most livelihoods were tied to the silver mines one way or another. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." He nodded, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. "I've put out some of my sister's old things for you. She left them when she moved to California last year. They might fit better than my clothes." "You have a sister, Sarah. She's married to a shopkeeper in Sacramento now." A fond smile softened his features. "She writes every month." "You must miss her." "I do, but she's happy there." He gestured to a small trunk at the foot of the bed. "Anyway, her clothes should be in there. I'll be outside if you need anything." After he left, Tabitha opened the trunk to find several simple but well-made dresses, a few blouses, and some undergarments. Selecting a blue calico dress that seemed closest to her size, she changed quickly, grateful to be in proper women's clothing again. The dress was a bit loose around the waist but otherwise fit well enough. After washing her face in the basin of water Kieran had thoughtfully left on the dresser, she braided her hair and pinned it up as neatly as she could without a mirror. The main room of the cabin was cozy, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a solid wooden table with 4 chairs in the center. A rocking chair sat by the window, and bookshelves lined another wall surprisingly well stocked for a cattle rancher's home. Everything was simple but clean and well maintained. Tabitha moved to the kitchen area, determined to prepare lunch as a small token of appreciation. She found a pantry stocked with basic supplies: flour, sugar, beans, preserved vegetables, and smoked meat. It wasn't the extensive larder her father maintained, but it was more than enough to work with. By the time Kieran returned, stomping snow from his boots at the threshold, she had a pot of bean soup simmering on the stove and a pan of cornbread baking in the oven. He paused, surprise evident on his face. "You didn't have to cook." "I wanted to," she replied, suddenly nervous. "I hope you don't mind my using your supplies." "Mind? No, I'm grateful. It smells a sight better than my usual fare." He removed his coat and hat, hanging them by the door. "Sarah's dress suits you." The simple compliment brought unexpected warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you for lending it to me. I'll take good care of it." "It's yours for as long as you need it," he said easily, washing his hands in the basin by the stove. Sarah would be pleased to know her things are being used. They ate lunch together, the conversation flowing more naturally than Tabitha would have expected with a man she barely knew. Kieran told her about the ranch, how his father had built it 30 years ago, how they'd weathered hard winters and dry summers, how he'd taken over completely after his father's death. "And your mother?" Tabitha asked hesitantly. "Died when I was 12. Influenza." His expression was somber but not bitter. "Sarah was just 8. Pa raised us on his own after that. I'm sorry. My mother died when I was 15. She stared into her soup. "Father was different when she was alive, or perhaps he just hid his true nature better." Kieran's expression darkened. Men who strike women are cowards, regardless of their reasons. The fierce conviction in his voice surprised her. Most men in Alta considered how a man treated his womenfolk to be his own business, not a matter for public judgment. "Not everyone shares that view," she said carefully. "Then not everyone is worth listening to," he replied simply. After lunch, despite Kieran's protests, Tabitha insisted on washing the dishes. As she worked, she gazed out the window at the ranch spread out before her. It was modest compared to a small barn, a corral, and a pasture where cattle huddled together against the cold. But there was something honest about the place, something that spoke of hard work and care. "You manage all this alone?" she asked when Kieran returned from bringing in more firewood. "Mostly. I hire help during calving season and for the big drives, but day to day it's just me. It must be lonely." He considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes. But there's peace in solitude that you don't find in town." "I wouldn't know," she admitted. "I've never had much solitude. Father always watched over me, especially after Mother died." "That's not watching over," Kieran said quietly. "That's control." The truth of his words struck her deeply. All these years, she'd thought her father's strictness was born of concern, but Kieran was right, it had always been about control. "What will you do when spring comes?" he asked, changing the subject. Tabitha turned from the window. "Try to find work somewhere far from here. Maybe Denver or Salt Lake City." "That's a long journey for a woman alone." "I don't have much choice. I can't stay in Alta, not with Father and Jeremiah Stone looking for me." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, you have time to plan. The pass won't be clear until late March at the earliest." 2 months, then. 2 months in this cabin with a man she barely knew but who had already shown her more kindness than most. The thought should have alarmed her, but instead she felt only relief. "I'll earn my keep," she promised again. "I'm a good cook and I can mend and clean." "I believe you," he said with a small smile, "but right now you're still recovering. Why don't you rest this afternoon? I've got a few more chores to tend to." After he left, Tabitha explored the cabin more thoroughly. The bookshelves caught her attention, filled with volumes of history, poetry, and novels. She ran her fingers along the spines, surprised by the collection. Her father had never approved of reading beyond the Bible and practical manuals. Selecting a volume of Tennyson's poetry, she settled in the rocking chair by the window. As the winter sun cast golden light across the pages, she felt a strange peace settle over her. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in her life, no one was watching her, judging her, or waiting to criticize her choices. She was free, at least for now. And that freedom, tentative as it was, felt like the most precious gift she'd ever received. As January gave way to February, Tabitha fell into a comfortable routine at the Dawson ranch. Each morning, she rose early to prepare breakfast before Kieran headed out for his first round of chores. While he was gone, she kept the cabin clean, mended clothes, and prepared meals. In the afternoons, when the weather permitted, she sometimes accompanied him on his rounds of the property, learning about cattle ranching with genuine interest. Her fears about her father had proven well-founded. A week after her escape, word reached them through Tom, the bartender who occasionally delivered supplies to the ranch, that Harold Brookfield was offering a reward for information about his daughter's whereabouts. "He's telling folks you're not right in the head," Tom had reported with a frown. "Says the cold might have made you delirious, that you need to be found for your own safety." "That's not true," Tabitha had protested, anger flaring. "I'm perfectly sound of mind." "Nobody who knows Brookfield believes it," Tom assured her, "but the reward is tempting some of the miners." Kieran had stood firm. "She's not going back, Tom, not to be sold off to stone like cattle at auction." "I figured as much," the bartender had replied with a knowing nod. "Don't worry, I ain't said nothing to nobody. Far as I'm concerned, I deliver to this ranch and mind my own business about who's staying here." The threat of discovery had brought them closer, united in a shared secret. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Tabitha sewing or reading, Kieran cleaning his gear or carving small wooden figures with surprising skill. They talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, books they'd read, hopes for the future. Tabitha found herself drawn to Kieran's steady presence, his quiet strength, and his unexpected gentleness. He never raised his voice, never made demands, never treated her as anything less than an equal. It was a revelation after years under her father's thumb. For his part, Kieran discovered in Tabitha a resilience he hadn't expected. Despite her sheltered upbringing, she adapted quickly to ranch life, never complaining about the simple fare or the hard work. Her quiet determination reminded him of his mother, who had faced frontier hardships with the same grace. One evening in mid-February, as a fresh snowfall blanketed the world outside, they sat at the table playing checkers. Tabitha had proven to be a surprisingly skilled opponent, winning as many games as she lost. "You're getting better at this," Kieran observed as she jumped 2 of his pieces. "Or perhaps you're letting me win," she countered with a small smile. He laughed, the sound warming the room. "I assure you I'm not. My pride wouldn't allow it." She studied the board, considering her next move. "My mother taught me to play. Father disapproved, he thought games were frivolous, but she insisted every child should know how to play." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Tabitha's expression grew distant. She used to tell me that life was like a game of checkers. Sometimes you had to sacrifice a piece to gain advantage later. Is that what you're doing now? Sacrificing something for a future advantage? Her eyes met his, suddenly serious. I've sacrificed my reputation, certainly. An unmarried woman living unchaperoned with a man. People will talk. Does that bother you? He asked quietly. It should, she admitted. That's what I was raised to believe. A woman's reputation is her most valuable possession. But I'm beginning to think there are more important things, like self-respect, like choosing one's own path. She moved another checker. King me. Kieran placed one of her captured pieces atop her checker that had reached his side of the board. And what path would you choose if you could choose anything? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Tabitha's fingers lingered on the crown checker, her thoughts racing. I don't know, she said finally. I've never been allowed to want things for myself. It's disorienting to suddenly have choices. You don't have to decide everything at once, he said gently. Some paths reveal themselves one step at a time. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. What about you? Is this the path you always wanted, running the ranch alone? Something flickered in his eyes, a brief shadow of some deeper emotion. Not always. I once thought I might go east, maybe study law, but after Pa died, there was the ranch to consider. Sarah was already engaged to her husband by then, planning to move to California. Someone had to stay. Do you regret it? No, he said after a moment's reflection. This land is in my blood. I belong here. The certainty in his voice stirred something in Tabitha, envy perhaps, for his clear sense of place in the world, or admiration for his contentment with the life he'd chosen. Your move, she reminded him softly. The game continued, but the conversation had shifted something between them. As they played, Tabitha found herself watching Kieran's hands, strong, capable hands that were nonetheless gentle when they needed to be. When he passed her a captured piece, their fingers brushed, and the brief contact sent a surprising warmth through her. She looked up to find him watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. Tabitha, he began, then paused, seeming to search for words. The use of her first name, so casual and yet so intimate, made her breath catch. Yes. Before he could continue, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They both froze, exchanging alarmed glances. No one visited the ranch at night, especially not in winter. Kieran rose quickly, motioning for Tabitha to retreat to her room. Stay back, he whispered, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted above the door. Heart pounding, Tabitha slipped into the bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar so she could hear. Who's there? Kieran called, rifle ready. Sheriff Mills, came the reply. Open up, Dawson. We need to talk. Tabitha's blood ran cold. Sheriff Mills was firmly in her father's pocket, owing to gambling debts that Brookfield had bought up years ago. She heard Kieran open the door, his voice deliberately casual. Evening, Sheriff. What brings you out in this weather? Got reports that you might be harboring Harold Brookfield's daughter, the sheriff said without preamble. She ran off a few weeks back. Father's worried sick. Is that so? Kieran's tone revealed nothing. Mind if I come in and look around? Actually, I do mind. It's late, and I don't appreciate uninvited guests. There was a tense silence. From her hiding place, Tabitha could see only a sliver of the scene, enough to glimpse the sheriff's weathered face and the badge glinting on his chest. Dawson, I don't want trouble. But Brookfield's offering good money to anyone who helps find his daughter. And since when does the sheriff's office work as hired trackers for private citizens? Kieran's voice had hardened. If Miss Brookfield left her father's house, perhaps she had good reason. That's not for you or me to judge. She's his daughter. She's a grown woman, Sheriff, 20 years old by my reckoning, old enough to decide where she lives. The sheriff's expression darkened. You admitting she's here, then? I'm not admitting anything except that I value my privacy and the rule of law. You got a warrant to search my property." Another tense silence followed. "You know I don't," the sheriff finally admitted. "But this isn't over, Dawson. Brookfield isn't a man you want as an enemy." "Neither am I," Kieran replied evenly. "Good night, Sheriff." After the door closed and the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Tabitha emerged from the bedroom, trembling slightly. "He knows I'm here," she whispered. Kieran set the rifle aside. "He suspects, but he doesn't know. And without a warrant, he can't legally search the place. But he'll be back with a warrant next time." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've put you in danger, involved you in my troubles. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize," Kieran said firmly, crossing to stand before her. "I knew what I was doing when I brought you here, when I decided to let you stay." "Why did you?" she asked suddenly. "Why risk so much for a woman you barely knew?" His expression softened. "At first, because it was the right thing to do. No one deserves to be forced into marriage or abused by those who should protect them. And later," she prompted when he paused. His green eyes met hers, unwavering. "Later, because I came to care about what happens to you, Tabitha, more than I expected to." The simple honesty of his words struck her deeply. No one, not even her mother, had ever spoken to her with such direct sincerity about matters of the heart. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's why I can't let you risk everything for me." "Perhaps I should leave, find somewhere else to hide until spring." "And go where?" he asked practically. In this weather, with the sheriff watching the roads, she had no answer for that. "We'll be more careful," Kieran decided. "You'll need to stay inside when anyone visits." "I'll speak to Tom, make sure he comes alone when he delivers supplies." "And when spring comes?" she asked. He hesitated, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "When spring comes, we'll figure it out together. If you want to leave Alta, then I'll help you. But until then, you're safe here. I promise." The conviction in his voice steadied her. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of her future in that moment, Tabitha felt something she hadn't experienced in years: trust. Complete, unwavering trust in another person. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching out to touch his arm lightly. His hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. They stood that way for a long moment, connected by touch and gaze, neither willing to break the fragile bond forming between them. Outside, snow continued to fall, adding another layer to the white blanket covering Alta. But inside the cabin, something else was growing, something neither of them had expected to find in the depths of a Utah winter. The weeks following Sheriff Mills' visit passed in heightened vigilance. Kieran reinforced the shutters on the windows and taught Tabitha how to use the rifle just in case, he'd said, though they both hoped it wouldn't come to that. They developed a system of signals, a particular pattern of knocks if it was Tom or another trusted visitor, a different arrangement if Tabitha needed to hide quickly. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, the connection between them deepened. Confined together in the small cabin, they learned each other's habits, preferences, and histories. Tabitha told Kieran about her mother's quiet rebellion in teaching her daughter poetry and music against her father's wishes. In turn, he shared stories of his father's dreams for the ranch and his sister's determined pursuit of a life beyond Alta's boundaries. One evening in early March, as the first hints of spring softened the winter's grip, Kieran returned from town with news. "Your father's getting desperate," he reported, shrugging off his coat. "He's doubled the reward, and he's spreading rumors that I've kidnapped you for nefarious purposes." Tabitha looked up from the shirt she was mending, alarm crossing her features. "What kind of rumors?" Kieran's jaw tightened. "The kind meant to destroy your reputation so completely that you'll have no choice but to accept Stone's offer." "That's despicable," she whispered, setting aside her sewing. "As if I would ever return to him after this." "Some in town are starting to question his story," Kieran continued, his expression lightening somewhat. "The widow Jenkins pointed out at the general store that it's mighty convenient you disappeared right before the wedding to Stone. And Doc Miller reminded folks about the bruises he'd treated you for in the past." "Dr. Miller noticed?" Tabitha asked, surprised. "He never said anything." "Maybe he should have," Kieran said, a hint of anger coloring his tone. "Maybe someone should have stepped in years ago." "It wouldn't have mattered. Father is too influential," she shook her head sadly. "No one crosses Harold Brookfield in Alta." "I did," Kieran pointed out, a glint of defiance in his eyes. She smiled at that. "Yes, you did, my knight in muddy boots." The teasing compliment brought a flush to his cheeks, and he busied himself stoking the fire. "There's something else you should know. The spring thaw has started early this year. Tom says the pass might be clear in 2 weeks, 3 at most." The news hung between them, laden with implications. Clear passages meant Tabitha could finally leave Alta, escape her father's reach for good. It also meant the end of their shared isolation, the quiet intimacy they'd built during these winter months. "I see," she said carefully, uncertain how to express the sudden conflict she felt. The freedom she'd craved was finally within reach, yet the prospect of leaving the ranch, leaving Kieran, filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. "I've been thinking," Kieran said, still facing the fire, "about what happens when the pass clears." "Oh," her heart quickened. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You could stay if you wanted, not hiding but openly. As my wife." The proposal, so plainly stated, took her breath away. "Kieran, hear me out," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden, and I know you've just escaped one unwanted marriage. The last thing I want is to trap you in another. But I care for you, Tabitha. These months together, they've been the best of my life." Emotion swelled in her chest, making it hard to speak. "Mine too," she managed. Encouraged, he continued. "As my wife, you'd be protected legally from your father's claims. He couldn't force you to return home or marry Stone. And I swear to you, I'd never try to control you the way he did. This would be a partnership in every sense." "Are you proposing because you want to protect me, or because you love me?" she asked directly. He crossed the room to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Both. I started by wanting to protect you, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you hum when you're cooking, the furrow between your brows when you're reading something challenging, the gentleness in your hands when you tend to the injured calf." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes. No one had ever seen her so completely, appreciated the small details that made her who she was. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on her lips. "But marriage is such a serious step." "It is," he agreed solemnly. "Which is why I want you to take time to think about it. The pass won't clear for weeks yet. You don't have to answer now." She studied his face, the earnest green eyes, the strong features softened by emotion, the hopeful vulnerability he was brave enough to show her. In that moment, she knew with sudden clarity what she wanted. "I don't need weeks," she said, tightening her grip on his hands. "Yes, Kieran, I'll marry you." Joy transformed his expression, and he pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. When they drew apart, he cupped her face gently, his thumb caressing the cheek where her father's bruise had long since faded. "I promise you'll never have reason to regret this," he vowed. "I know," she said with simple certainty. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent, years of loneliness dissolving in the warmth of discovered love. When they finally separated, both were breathless, slightly dazed by the intensity of their connection. "When should we marry?" she asked, her voice husky. "As soon as possible," he replied. "We can ride to Cedar City once the pass clears. There's a minister there who doesn't know your father." The practical details grounded their soaring emotions, reminding them of the obstacles still ahead. Tabitha's father wouldn't surrender his control easily, and Alta was still his domain. "What about the ranch?" she asked. "Tom can watch it for a few days. We'll leave quietly, get married, and return as husband and wife." His expression hardened slightly. "Once that's done, not even Harold Brookfield can separate us legally." The plan was simple but sound. For the first time since fleeing into the winter night, Tabitha allowed herself to envision a future not just an escape, but a life built with someone who valued her for herself. That night, as they lay in separate beds for what they both knew would be one of the last times, Tabitha gazed at the ceiling, marveling at the turns her life had taken. 3 months ago, she'd been a prisoner in her father's house, facing a loveless marriage to a man old enough to be her grandfather. Now she was choosing a husband who respected her, who had risked everything to protect her. The footprints she'd left in the snow that desperate night had led her not just to safety, but to love a path she couldn't have imagined when she fled into the darkness. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. They decided to keep their engagement secret until they could marry, knowing that word of their plans would reach Harold Brookfield if they announced their intentions in Alta. Tom, when told of their need to leave the ranch for a few days, asked no questions but offered his full support. "About time you found someone, Dawson," was all he said, with a knowing look that suggested he'd suspected their growing attachment long before they'd acknowledged it themselves. As March progressed, the weather warmed steadily, melting the snow in the pass bit by bit. Reports from travelers suggested it would be passable by the following week, and Kieran and Tabitha made their plans accordingly. They would leave before dawn, travel through the pass, and reach Cedar City by nightfall. The following day, they would find the minister and marry quietly, with only the required witnesses present. Then they would return to Alta as husband and wife, ready to face whatever consequences awaited them. "What if Father tries to separate us even after we're married?" Tabitha asked one evening as they discussed their plans. "He can't legally," Kieran assured her. "As your husband, I become your legal guardian, not him." She frowned at that. "I don't want anyone to be my guardian, I want to be my own person." Kieran took her hand. "In the eyes of the law, every woman needs a male guardian. But in our home, in our life together, you'll be my equal partner. I swear it." She believed him. In all their time together, he had never once tried to control her choices or dismiss her opinions. It was one of the many reasons she had fallen in love with him. The day before their planned departure, Kieran rode into town for final supplies. Tabitha spent the morning packing a small bag for their journey and preparing a special dinner to celebrate their last night before becoming husband and wife. She was in the kitchen, rolling out dough for an apple pie, Kieran's favorite, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Smiling, she wiped flour from her hands, expecting to greet her soon-to-be husband. But when she glanced out the window, her smile died on her lips. 3 riders were approaching, and at their head was her father, his face set in a cold mask she knew all too well. Fear shot through her, paralyzing her momentarily. How had he found out? Who had betrayed them? Forcing herself to move, she rushed to the rifle Kieran kept loaded by the door. Her hands shook as she lifted it, remembering Kieran's careful instructions. "Tabitha." Her father's voice boomed as he dismounted. "Come out now, girl. I know you're in there." She remained silent, heart pounding as she positioned herself behind the door. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he continued, his voice deceptively reasonable. You've had your adventure, but it's time to come home. Mr. Stone is still willing to overlook this indiscretion. The other men with him, she recognized them as miners who sometimes worked for her father, spread out, one moving toward the back of the cabin. I'm not coming with you, she called through the door, keeping the rifle ready. Go away, father. I'm not your property to sell to the highest bidder. A harsh laugh answered her. Don't be dramatic, girl. You've always had fanciful notions. That Cowboy's filled your head with nonsense, but it's time to face reality. You have responsibilities to your family name. My only responsibility is to myself, she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I'm staying here. With that ranch hand. Her father's tone dripped with contempt. What kind of life do you think he can give you? Poverty and hard work, that's all. Stone can provide for you properly. I'd rather have love and hard work than luxury and misery. A heavy silence followed her declaration. Love, her father finally spat. Your mother spoke of love too, and look where it got her. Dead before her time, leaving me with a disobedient daughter. Mother died because you worked her to exhaustion and refused to call the doctor until it was too late, Tabitha said, the long-buried truth finally emerging. Not because she loved you. A crash from the back of the cabin startled her. One of the men was trying to force the shuttered window. Tabitha pivoted, keeping the rifle trained in that direction. You have 1 minute to come out, her father called, his voice hardening. Or we're coming in to get you. Tabitha's mind raced. Where was Kieran? He should have been back by now. Had something happened to him in town? I have a rifle, she warned, and I know how to use it. Her father's laugh held no humor. You won't shoot your own father, Tabitha. You haven't the spine for it. He was right. Despite everything, she couldn't imagine pulling the trigger on him, but she could keep them at bay until Kieran returned. The minute passed in tense silence. Then came the sound of boots on the porch, and the door handle rattled. Last chance, daughter, her father called. Leave me alone. She shouted, backing away from the door, rifle still raised. The next moment happened in a blur. The door burst open. Her father's imposing figure filled the doorway, and behind him, the sound of more hoofbeats approaching fast. Brookfield, Kieran's voice rang out, sharp with warning. Step away from my house. Relief flooded Tabitha as her father turned, momentarily distracted by the newcomer. She used the opportunity to move to the far side of the room, keeping the rifle steady. Through the open door, she could see Kieran dismounting, his own rifle in hand. 2 figures accompanied him, Tom from the saloon and, surprisingly, Dr. Miller. This doesn't concern you, Dawson, her father said coldly. I've come for my daughter. She's not yours to claim, Kieran replied, his voice level but dangerous. She's a grown woman who's made her choice. A foolish choice made by a foolish girl, her father sneered. The law gives me authority over her until she marries. That's why we're here, Brookfield, doctor. Miller interjected, stepping forward. To witness that very event. Confusion crossed her father's face. What nonsense is this? Judge Parker is right behind us, Kieran explained, a hint of triumph in his voice. He's agreed to perform the ceremony here and now. Once Tabitha is my wife, your legal claim to her ends. I forbid it, her father roared, starting toward Kieran. You can't, Dr. Miller said firmly. She's of legal age to marry with or without your blessing. The judge agreed when I showed him the records of her injuries over the years, injuries consistent with abuse. Tabitha stared at the doctor in shock. All those times he'd treated her bruises and sprains, he'd been keeping records, waiting for the day she might need them. Her father turned to her, his face contorted with rage. You ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you, you've done nothing but hurt her, Kieran cut in, stepping between them. And it ends today. The sound of yet another horse approaching drew everyone's attention. An elderly man with a trimmed white beard rode slowly into the yard. Judge Parker, the federal judge who occasionally traveled through Alta on circuit. "What's all this commotion?" the judge demanded, surveying the scene with shrewd eyes. "Dr. Miller, you said this was an urgent matter of justice." "It is, Your Honor," the doctor replied respectfully. "Miss Brookfield wishes to marry Mr. Dawson, and her father is attempting to prevent it by force." The judge's gaze fell on Tabitha, still holding the rifle, then to her father, and finally to Kieran. "Is this true, young lady? You wish to marry of your own free will?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said firmly, lowering the rifle slightly. "With all my heart." "She's confused," her father interjected. "This man has filled her head with romantic nonsense. I'm trying to secure her future with a respectable match." "To Jeremiah Stone," the judge said with a frown. "A man 40 years her senior. Yes, I've heard about this arrangement, Brookfield. It doesn't speak well of your motives." Her father's face reddened. "My motives are not on trial here." "Perhaps they should be," the judge replied mildly. "Dr. Miller has shown me some disturbing evidence regarding your treatment of your daughter." A tense silence fell over the yard. Tabitha's father looked from the judge to the doctor, realization dawning that his position was weaker than he'd believed. "Young lady," the judge said, addressing Tabitha directly, "please come outside. I'd like to speak with you privately." Tabitha hesitated, glancing at Kieran, who nodded encouragingly. Setting the rifle aside, she stepped out onto the porch. The judge dismounted with the stiffness of age and led her a short distance away from the others. "Tell me the truth, Miss Brookfield. Has Mr. Dawson coerced you in any way? Are you marrying him to escape your father, or because you truly wish to be his wife?" "Both, Your Honor," she answered honestly. "I did come here initially to escape my father's cruelty and the marriage he was forcing on me. But in these months with Kieran, I've found something I never expected: love, respect, partnership. I want to marry him because I love him, not just because it offers protection from my father." The judge studied her face, seeming to search for signs of deception or uncertainty. Finding none, he nodded. "And these injuries Dr. Miller documented. Your father was responsible." She swallowed hard but held his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor, for years. Why didn't you seek help sooner?" "I was afraid and ashamed, and I had nowhere to go." She glanced toward Kieran. "Until now." Something in the judge's stern expression softened. "Very well. If you're certain this is what you want, I see no legal reason to prevent the marriage. You're of age, and from what I can see, Mr. Dawson appears to be a respectable man." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Your Honor." They returned to the tense standoff in the yard. Her father's men had moved to flank him, hands hovering near their guns. Kieran stood his ground, Tom and Dr. Miller beside him. "Gentlemen," the judge announced, "I've decided to proceed with the marriage ceremony here and now if the couple is willing." "We are," Kieran said immediately, his eyes finding Tabitha's. "This is outrageous," her father protested. "I won't allow it. You have no legal standing to prevent it," the judge replied calmly. "Your daughter is 20 years old, Mr. Brookfield. In the eyes of the law, she may marry whom she chooses." "Then I'll disown her," her father threatened, glaring at Tabitha. "Not a penny of my money or property will ever be hers." "I don't want your money," Tabitha said, surprising herself with her composure. "I never did." For a moment, her father seemed at a loss for words, as if he couldn't comprehend someone valuing something above wealth and status. "Miss Brookfield, Mr. Dawson," the judge continued, "if you'll stand before me, we'll proceed with the ceremony." As if in a dream, Tabitha moved to Kieran's side. He took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "I didn't expect it to happen quite this way," he whispered as the judge opened his book of law. Does it matter? She whispered back, smiling through sudden tears. We'll be together. That's all I care about. The ceremony was brief but binding. Under the vast Utah sky, with the mountains as witnesses, Tabitha and Kieran exchanged vows of love and fidelity. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed her with a tenderness that belied the tension surrounding them. Her father watched in stony silence, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. When the final words were spoken, he mounted his horse without a word. "This isn't over," he warned as he prepared to ride away. "You'll regret crossing me, both of you. Threats against a newly married couple are in poor taste, Brookfield," the judge admonished. "I suggest you return to town and reconsider your position." With a final glare, her father wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following close behind. As the dust settled from their departure, Tabitha found herself enveloped in Kieran's strong embrace, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "Wife," he murmured into her hair, the word filled with wonder. "Husband," she replied, looking up at him with a joy so complete it felt almost like pain. Around them, Tom grinned broadly, Dr. Miller nodded in satisfaction, and even the judge allowed himself a small smile. "Well," Tom said, breaking the moment, "I believe this calls for a celebration. Good thing I brought some whiskey." Laughter bubbled up from Tabitha's chest, releasing the tension of the confrontation. They were married. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That evening, after the judge, Tom, and Dr. Miller had departed with promises to return for a proper celebration, once things had settled, Tabitha and Kieran sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You regret not having a proper wedding?" Kieran asked, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned against him, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. "No, it was perfect in its own way. Besides, we can still take that trip to Cedar City if you want. A honeymoon instead of a wedding journey." "I'd like that," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But there's no rush now. We have all the time in the world." All the time in the world. The promise of those words filled Tabitha with quiet joy. From the moment she'd fled into the winter night, leaving those desperate footprints in the snow, her life had been leading to this not just escape, but a new beginning with a man who saw her true self and loved her for it. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tabitha silently thanked the winter storm that had driven her from her father's house and into the arms of the man who had followed her footprints home. Spring arrived in earnest, turning the snow-covered landscape into a riot of green and wildflowers. The pass cleared completely, bringing increased traffic through Alta as miners and merchants who had wintered elsewhere returned for the new season. For Tabitha and Kieran, the first weeks of marriage brought both joy and challenges. As word of their sudden wedding spread through town, reactions were mixed. Some, like the widow Jenkins, openly supported them, stopping by the ranch with gifts and well wishes. Others, influenced by Harold Brookfield's position and wealth, regarded them with suspicion or outright hostility. Tabitha's father, true to his word, had publicly disowned her, announcing in church that she was no longer his daughter in name or inheritance. The declaration had hurt more than Tabitha expected, despite their strained relationship. For all his faults, he was her only living family, and his complete rejection reopened childhood wounds she thought had scarred over long ago. "He might come around with time," Kieran had suggested one evening, finding her staring pensively out the window. She'd shaken her head. "You don't know him like I do. Once father makes a decision, he never wavers. Pride won't allow it." Despite this shadow, their life together blossomed with each passing day. Tabitha threw herself into ranch work with enthusiasm, learning to ride properly, to help with the cattle, even to mend fences alongside Kieran. He, in turn, built her a small garden plot beside the cabin, where she planted vegetables and flowers, transforming the plain yard into something vibrant and alive. In the evenings, they would read together, Kieran's deep voice bringing poetry and novels to life in a way Tabitha had never experienced. Sometimes they would simply talk for hours, sharing dreams and memories, weaving their separate pasts into a shared understanding. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other in the most intimate way, their bodies expressing what words sometimes could not: devotion, desire, and a deepening love that surprised them both with its intensity. By May, the ranch was flourishing. The calves born that spring were healthy and strong, promising a good return when selling time came in the fall. Kieran had expanded the garden for Tabitha, and she had begun selling excess vegetables to neighbors and in town, establishing herself as more than just that Brookfield girl who married beneath her, as some still called her. One warm afternoon, as Tabitha was hanging laundry in the yard, Tom rode up with his regular delivery of supplies from town. "Morning, Mrs. Dawson," he called cheerfully, dismounting with a sack of flour over his shoulder. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is indeed, Tom." "And please, it's still Tabitha to you," he grinned, setting down the flour. "Old habits die hard. Where's that husband of yours?" Checking the north pasture fence. "He should be back for lunch soon." She paused, noticing Tom's slightly nervous expression. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Might as well tell you. There's talk in town that your father's filing a legal claim against Kieran." Her hand stilled on the wet shirt she'd been hanging. "What kind of claim?" "Something about Kieran alienating the affections of his daughter," Tom explained awkwardly. "It's an old law, hardly ever used, but your father's found a lawyer in Salt Lake City willing to pursue it." Cold dread settled in Tabitha's stomach. "He's claiming Kieran stole me away. That's absurd." "I left of my own accord. You and I know that, but your father's telling anyone who'll listen that Kieran seduced you away from a respectable match." Tom shook his head disgustedly. "Most folks don't believe it, but Brookfield has influence with the territorial court." "What could happen if he succeeds?" she asked, fear tightening her throat. "Damages, mostly. He'd try to get money from Kieran, maybe even claim the ranch as compensation." Tom looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to bring bad news, but I thought you should know." "Thank you, Tom. We appreciate the warning." After he left, Tabitha paced the yard anxiously, waiting for Kieran to return. This was exactly what she had feared, that her decision to leave would somehow hurt the man she loved. When Kieran rode in an hour later, she rushed to meet him, the words tumbling out in a rush of worry. He listened calmly, dismounting and leading his horse to the barn as she explained what Tom had told her. "I've been expecting something like this," he admitted once she'd finished. "Your father isn't the type to accept defeat gracefully." "But he could take the ranch," she cried, following him into the barn. "Everything your family has built." Kieran turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Tabitha, look at me. No court is going to award your father this property based on such a flimsy claim. Judge Parker witnessed our marriage and knows the circumstances. He'll testify if needed." "But what if—" "No what ifs," he interrupted gently. "We'll face this together like everything else. I'm not afraid of Harold Brookfield or his city lawyers." His confidence calmed her somewhat, but the worry lingered. That night, as they lay in bed, Kieran asleep beside her, Tabitha stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. What if her father's influence was stronger than they realized? What if the judge who heard the case was unsympathetic? What if they lost everything? The next morning, she made a decision. After Kieran left to check on a sick calf, Tabitha changed into her best dress, one of Sarah's that Kieran had altered to fit her better, and saddled the gentle mare he had been teaching her to ride. The journey into Alta took less than an hour. As she rode down the main street, she was acutely aware of eyes following her, curious, judgmental, sympathetic. It was her first time returning to town since the day she'd fled into the winter night, and the memories pressed against her like physical weight. Her father's house stood at the edge of town, a large, imposing structure that overlooked the smaller miners' cottages. Tabitha tied her horse to the hitching post and stood for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she climbed the familiar steps and knocked firmly on the door. It was opened by Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper who had worked for her father since before Tabitha's birth. "Miss Tabitha," the older woman exclaimed, eyes widening in surprise. "I mean Mrs. Dawson now, isn't it?" "Hello, Mrs. Collins," Tabitha said warmly. "Is my father at home?" The housekeeper's expression grew guarded. "He is, but he's given strict instructions that you're not to be admitted. Please tell him I'm here. Tell him." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell him I've come to discuss the legal matter, and that it would be better settled privately than in open court." Mrs. Collins hesitated, then nodded. "Wait here." The minutes stretched as Tabitha stood on the porch, memories flooding back, some good, from her mother's time, but many dark and painful from the years after her death. When the door finally reopened, it was her father himself who stood there, his imposing figure blocking the entrance. "What do you want?" he demanded without preamble. Tabitha straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "May I come in? What I have to say is better said in private." For a moment she thought he would refuse, but then he stepped aside, allowing her to enter the house that had once been her prison. The parlor was exactly as she remembered it: formal, cold, immaculate. Her father indicated a chair but remained standing himself, a power play she recognized from countless confrontations over the years. "I understand you're filing a legal claim against my husband," she began, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "So the bartender told you." Her father's tone was dismissive. "I have every right to seek compensation for the loss of my investment." "Investment?" she repeated, anger flaring. "Is that all I ever was to you? An asset to be sold to Jeremiah Stone?" "Don't be dramatic, Tabitha. Of course you were more than that. You're my daughter, my only child. I wanted to secure your future with a man of means and standing, without any consideration for my happiness." He waved a hand impatiently. "Happiness is fleeting. Security lasts. Your mother filled your head with romantic notions, but I tried to raise you to be practical." "By beating me when I disagreed with you?" she asked quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, not remorse, exactly, but perhaps discomfort. "I disciplined you as my father disciplined me." "It was for your own good." "It was never for my good, father. It was for your control." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to ask you to drop this legal claim against Kieran." Her father's laugh was harsh. "Why would I do that? That ranch hand stole you away, ruined the match with Stone, humiliated me in front of the entire town." "No," she said firmly. "I left of my own accord. I married Kieran because I love him. If you pursue this claim, you'll only bring more attention to the reasons I fled in the first place." "Threats, Tabitha. That's beneath you. Not threats, truth." She stood, moving to face him directly. "Dr. Miller has records of every injury you ever inflicted on me. Judge Parker has seen them. If this goes to court, those records will become public. Everyone will know what happened behind closed doors in the Brookfield house." Her father's face paled slightly, but his expression remained defiant. "No one would believe it. I'm a respected businessman. Are you willing to take that chance? She held his gaze steadily. Because I am. I have nothing to hide anymore, Father, but you do. A tense silence fell between them, the air heavy with unspoken history and pain. Finally, her father turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the street. What do you want? He asked, his voice suddenly tired. Drop the legal claim. Leave Kieran and me in peace, that's all. And in return, the past stays in the past. She took a deep breath. And perhaps with time we might find some way to be family again, not as we were, but something new. He turned back to her, surprise evident in his expression. You would consider reconciliation, after everything? Not immediately, she clarified, and not unconditionally. But yes, eventually, I would be willing to try. You're my only family by blood, Father. Despite everything, that still means something to me. For a moment, Tabitha glimpsed something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability, and perhaps a hint of the man he had been before grief and bitterness had hardened him. I'll consider it, he said finally. No promises. It wasn't the clear victory she had hoped for, but it was more than she had expected. Thank you, that's all I ask. As she prepared to leave, her father called after her. Tabitha, are you happy with him? The question caught her off guard with its sincerity. Yes, Father. Happier than I've ever been. He nodded once, a brief acknowledgement before turning away. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, but it was something, a crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. When she returned to the ranch, Kieran was waiting anxiously, having discovered her absence and guessed where she had gone. You shouldn't have gone alone, he said, helping her dismount. It could have been dangerous. It wasn't, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. He's my father, Kieran. For all his faults, he wouldn't physically harm me in public in broad daylight. What happened? What did he say? She related the conversation as they walked to the house. When she finished, Kieran shook his head in amazement. You're the bravest person I've ever known, he said, pulling her close. Facing him alone like that. Not brave, she corrected. Just determined. I couldn't let him take you down with me. We rise or fall together, he reminded her. That's what marriage means. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, a rider approached one of the clerk's assistants from the territorial court office. Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, he called, reining in his horse. I have a notice for you. Tabitha's heart sank as Kieran accepted the envelope. This was it, her father's lawsuit, officially filed despite her plea. But as Kieran opened it and scanned the contents, his expression changed from concern to surprise, then relief. It's a notice of withdrawal, he explained, handing her the document. Your father has dropped the claim. Tabitha read it herself, hardly daring to believe it. The legal language was formal but clear. Harold Brookfield was no longer pursuing any action against Kieran Dawson. He did it, she whispered. He actually listened. Kieran wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Maybe there's hope for him yet. Maybe, she agreed cautiously. But even if there isn't, we're free now. Truly free to build our life together without his shadow hanging over us. As summer bloomed across the mountains, Tabitha and Kieran's life settled into a rhythm of work and love that satisfied them both deeply. The ranch prospered under their joint care, and Tabitha's garden yielded bountifully. She began preserving vegetables and fruits for the winter ahead, finding unexpected joy in planning for a future that was entirely her own choosing. In July, they received a letter from Kieran's sister in California, responding to the news of their marriage with delight and plans to visit at Christmas. I can't wait to meet the woman brave enough to take on my stubborn brother, Sarah wrote, making them both laugh. Relations with Tabitha's father remained distant but civil. He had indeed withdrawn the legal claim, and occasionally he would acknowledge her with a nod when they passed in town. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. One warm August evening, as they sat on their porch enjoying the cooler air after a hot day, Tabitha turned to Kieran with a smile that held a secret. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Joy transformed his face as the meaning of her words sank in. "A baby? You're sure?" She nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. He says the baby will come in early spring." Kieran pulled her into a gentle embrace, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you." As twilight deepened around them, Tabitha leaned against her husband's solid strength, thinking of the journey that had brought them here from footprints in the snow to a future rich with promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by a love that had begun on the coldest of nights but would warm them for all the days to come. The winter of 1879 proved milder than the one before, as if nature itself was being kind to the expectant mother. Tabitha's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing with the passing months to accommodate the new life growing within. By December, she had developed a noticeable roundness that Kieran found endlessly fascinating, often resting his hand on her belly to feel the baby's movements. "He's going to be a strong one," he declared one evening as a particularly forceful kick made Tabitha wince. "Or she," Tabitha reminded him with a smile. "It might be a girl, you know." "Either way," Kieran amended, "our child is already making their presence known." Christmas brought Sarah's promised visit, Kieran's sister arriving on the stagecoach with trunks full of gifts and stories of California life. The resemblance between the siblings was striking. Sarah had the same green eyes and warm smile, though her manner was more exuberant than her brother's quiet steadiness. "Look at you," she exclaimed upon seeing Tabitha's pregnant form. "Already making me an aunt. I couldn't be happier." The two women formed an immediate bond, Sarah's open affection a balm to Tabitha, who had never experienced the warmth of extended family. For 2 weeks, the cabin was filled with laughter, stories, and preparations for both Christmas and the coming baby. "I've brought something for the little one," Sarah announced on Christmas Eve, pulling a carefully wrapped bundle from one of her trunks. "It was ours when we were small." Inside was a beautifully crafted cradle, small enough to sit beside a bed but large enough to serve a baby for many months. "Pa made it when I was born," Kieran explained, running his hand reverently over the polished wood. "Sarah took it when she married, but my Philip and I have decided children aren't in our future," Sarah finished, a shadow briefly crossing her face. "We have the store, and that's enough for us. I want my niece or nephew to have this piece of family history." Tears filled Tabitha's eyes as she embraced her sister-in-law. "It's perfect, thank you." That night, as they prepared for bed, Tabitha found Kieran standing by the window staring out at the star-filled sky. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Family," he said simply. "How it grows and changes, how it heals." She leaned against him, understanding in her heart what he meant. Family had once been a source of pain for both of them, his loss to death, hers damaged by cruelty. But now they were building something new together, something wholesome and loving. "I received a letter today," she said after a comfortable silence. "From Father." Kieran turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "What did it say?" "Not much. He wished us a Merry Christmas, and he asked if he might call on us sometime after the New Year." She hesitated. "I haven't replied yet. I wanted to discuss it with you first." Kieran was quiet for a moment, considering. "Do you want to see him?" I think I do," she admitted. "Not for his sake, but for mine, and for our child's. I don't want to carry this burden of resentment forever, Kieran. I want to be free of it, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then right back. Tell him he's welcome to visit. But Tabitha, he added, his expression serious, if at any point he upsets you or threatens our peace, he leaves. Your well-being and our baby's comes first. Agreed, she said, grateful for his support. January passed in a flurry of preparation for the baby. Kieran expanded their bedroom to make space for the cradle and built a rocking chair that he placed by the fireplace for those long nights with a fussy baby. He explained with a smile. Tabitha sewed constantly, turning sheets and blankets into tiny garments, while Sarah's parting gift of baby clothes from California expanded their collection further. The widow Jenkins organized a gathering of Alta's women, who arrived at the ranch one afternoon bearing additional gifts and wisdom for the mother-to-be. Never thought I'd see old Harold Brookfield's daughter married to Tom Dawson's boy, one elderly woman remarked, not unkindly. But you two seem well matched. That's a blessing not everyone finds. It is indeed, Tabitha agreed, exchanging a warm glance with Kieran, who was tactfully making himself scarce during the female gathering. February brought Harold Brookfield to their door, his tall figure awkward and stiff as he stood on the porch, hat in hand. Tabitha, now in her 8th month and moving with the careful deliberation of the heavily pregnant, greeted him with cautious politeness. "Father, please come in." He entered, his eyes taking in the cabin's interior before settling on his daughter's swollen belly. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, at the physical evidence of her new life. "You're looking well," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "Thank you." "Would you like some coffee?" he nodded, and Tabitha moved to the stove, grateful for the familiar task to occupy her nervous hands. Kieran, who had been mending harnesses at the table, rose to his feet. "Mr. Brookfield," he greeted, his tone neutral but not hostile. "Welcome to our home." Her father nodded stiffly. "Dawson." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by the sounds of Tabitha preparing coffee. When she returned with 3 steaming mugs, her father accepted his with a murmured thanks. "When is the child due?" he asked after taking a sip. "March," Tabitha replied. "Dr. Miller thinks early in the month." Her father nodded again. "Your mother had an easy time of it with you. Hopefully, you've inherited that from her." The mention of her mother, so casual after years of silence on the subject, startled Tabitha. "You never speak of her." "No," he acknowledged, something like regret crossing his features. "It was painful, still is." Another silence, this one heavy with unspoken history. Kieran glanced at Tabitha, a question in his eyes. She gave a small nod and he excused himself, stepping outside to give father and daughter privacy. "Why are you here, father?" Tabitha asked once they were alone. "After all this time?" He stared into his coffee cup as if the answer might be found there. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted finally. Perhaps age is making me reconsider some things." "What things?" "My life, my choices." He looked up at her, his expression unusually vulnerable. "The fact that I'm about to have a grandchild I might never know." Tabitha placed a protective hand over her belly. "That depends on you, on whether you can accept my choices, my life with Kieran." "I'm trying," he said, and she was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "It's not easy for me to admit when I'm wrong." "Your mother always said it was my worst quality." A small smile touched Tabitha's lips. "She was right about that. She usually was." A hint of fondness colored his tone. "You remind me of her, not just in looks but in spirit. She had that same determination." "I never knew that," Tabitha said softly. "You never talked about her after she died." "No," he agreed. "That was a mistake. One of many." The admission, simple as it was, represented a monumental shift in the man Tabitha had known all her life. Her father had never acknowledged mistakes, had never shown this kind of reflection. "What changed?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Jeremiah Stone died last month. Heart failure." "I'm sorry," she said automatically, though she felt no grief for the man who had tried to buy her. "Don't be. He wasn't a good man." Her father's blunt assessment surprised her. "I knew that even when I was pushing you to marry him. I told myself it was for your security, but—" He trailed off, then seemed to force himself to continue. "But the truth is, I owed him money, a great deal of money." The marriage would have canceled the debt. The revelation stunned Tabitha. "You were selling me to pay your debts." "Yes." No excuses, no justifications. Just the simple, damning truth. Anger flared within her, hot and sudden. "How could you, your own daughter?" "Because I was desperate and selfish," he replied, his voice flat. "I've had a lot of time to think since you left, since the lawsuit was withdrawn, about the kind of man I've become." Tabitha struggled to process his words, to reconcile this reflective man with the father who had struck her, who had tried to force her into marriage with a man old enough to be her grandfather. "Stone's death made me realize how close I came to condemning you to that life," he continued. "And then to hear you were with child. It reminded me of your mother, of how happy we were when we learned you were coming." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes, unexpected emotion rising in her throat. "We were happy once, weren't we, as a family?" "Yes," he said simply. "Before I let bitterness consume me." They sat in silence, the weight of the past and the possibility of the future hanging between them. Finally, Tabitha spoke. "I can't forget what you did, Father, the pain you caused, but I don't want to hold on to hatred, not with a child on the way." "I understand," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't expect forgiveness, I'd like to know my grandchild if you'll allow it." Tabitha considered his request, searching her heart for the answer. "We can try," she said finally, slowly, with boundaries. "Kieran and I will decide how and when you see the baby." Relief crossed her father's features. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." When Kieran returned, he found them talking quietly about the ranch, the conversation stilted but civil. He raised an eyebrow at Tabitha, who gave him a small nod of reassurance. "Mr. Brookfield was just leaving," she explained, rising awkwardly from her chair. Her father stood as well, placing his hat on his head. "Thank you for the coffee and for hearing me out." At the door he paused, turning back to Kieran. "You've done well with this place, Dawson. Your father would be proud." The unexpected compliment clearly caught Kieran off guard. "Thank you, sir." After her father had gone, Tabitha sank into Kieran's embrace, emotionally exhausted but strangely at peace. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I think I am. He's changed, Kieran, or trying to." "People can change," he agreed cautiously, "if they want it badly enough." "We'll see," she said, not ready to fully trust her father's transformation but willing to leave the door open to possibility. That night, as they lay in bed, the baby kicked vigorously, as if responding to the day's emotional events. Kieran's hand rested on the spot, his touch warm and reassuring. "Whatever happens with your father," he murmured, "our child will never doubt they're loved, not for a single moment." "No," Tabitha agreed, covering his hand with hers. "They won't." As February gave way to March and the first signs of spring began to appear in the landscape, Tabitha felt a growing sense of anticipation, not just for the baby's arrival, but for this new chapter in their lives together. From those desperate footprints in the snow to this moment, their journey had been unexpected and challenging, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. "I think it's time," Tabitha whispered. waking Kieran in the pre-dawn darkness of a March morning. The pains had started hours earlier, but she'd waited until they were regular and strong before rousing him. He was instantly alert, sitting up and lighting the bedside lamp. "Are you sure?" she nodded, clutching his hand as another contraction gripped her. "Doctor Miller said to send for him when the pains were coming regularly." "They are." Kieran moved with the calm efficiency that had first drawn her to him, helping her into a more comfortable position before pulling on his clothes. "I'll ride for the doctor right away," he promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Mrs. Jenkins said she'd come help when the time came. I'll stop there first." "Hurry," Tabitha said, fear mingling with excitement as she contemplated the hours ahead. By the time Kieran returned with the widow Jenkins in tow, Tabitha's labor had intensified. The older woman took charge immediately, shooing Kieran out to wait for the doctor, while she helped Tabitha change into a clean nightgown. "My mother," Tabitha gasped between contractions, "died in childbirth." "Hush now," Mrs. Jenkins said firmly. "Your mother had a weak-heart child. Everyone knew it. You're strong as an ox." The reassurance helped, but as the hours passed and the pain increased, Tabitha found herself gripped by fear. What if something went wrong? What if Kieran was left alone with a baby and no wife, as her father had been doctor? Miller arrived mid-morning, his calm presence reassuring as he examined her. "Everything is progressing normally," he declared. "The baby is in the right position. You're doing wonderfully, Tabitha." Kieran was allowed to return to her side between examinations, his steady presence anchoring her through the waves of pain. He wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, murmured encouragement, and held her hand through the worst contractions. "I love you," he told her repeatedly, his voice firm with conviction. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." As afternoon faded into evening, Tabitha's labor entered its final, most intense phase. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, seeming to tear her apart from within. "I can't," she sobbed after a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this." "You are doing it," Kieran countered, his face pale with concern but his voice steady. "Our child is almost here, Tabitha, just a little longer." Dr. Miller positioned himself at the foot of the bed. "It's time to push, Tabitha. With the next contraction, bear down as hard as you can." The next minutes, or was it hours, passed in a blur of pain, effort, and encouragement from the voices around her. Tabitha focused on Kieran's face, on the love and faith she saw there, drawing strength from his unwavering belief in her. And then, suddenly, the most extraordinary sound filled the room, the lusty cry of a newborn taking their first breath. "A boy, Doctor," Miller announced, holding up the squalling infant. A fine, healthy son. Joy unlike anything Tabitha had ever known flooded through her, washing away the pain and fear. She reached out instinctively as the doctor placed the swaddled bundle in her arms. "Look at him, Kieran," she whispered, staring in wonder at the tiny, perfect face. "He's beautiful." Kieran's eyes shone with tears as he gently touched his son's downy head. "He is, just like his mother." The baby had a shock of dark hair like Kieran's, but his features were delicate like Tabitha's. As they watched, he opened his eyes newborn blue, but with hints of green that suggested they might eventually match his father's. "What will you name him, Mrs. Jenkins asked, her own eyes suspiciously moist as she watched the new family. Tabitha and Kieran exchanged a glance. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to see their child first. "Thomas," Tabitha said softly. "Thomas James Dawson." "For my father," Kieran explained, his voice thick with emotion. "And for Tabitha's grandfather, who she always said was the kindest man she knew." "A fine name," Dr. Miller approved. Welcome to the world, Thomas James." The following days passed in a haze of joy and exhaustion as Tabitha and Kieran adjusted to life with their newborn son. Tom the bartender, delighted to learn the baby shared his name, arrived with a small wooden horse he'd carved himself for when he's older, he explained gruffly. Doctor Miller checked on mother and child daily, pronouncing both in excellent health. Mrs. Jenkins visited often, bringing meals and practical advice on everything from feeding to bathing the tiny newcomer. A week after Thomas's birth, Harold Brookfield appeared at their door, his arms laden with an intricately carved wooden chest. "For the boy," he said awkwardly when Kieran admitted him. "It was mine as a child, and before that my father's." Tabitha, sitting by the fire with Thomas in her arms, looked up in surprise. "Thank you, Father, it's beautiful, may I?" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I see him?" After a glance at Kieran, who nodded slightly, Tabitha motioned her father closer. "Meet your grandson, Thomas James Dawson." Harold approached slowly, as if afraid the baby might shatter under his gaze. When he finally looked down at Thomas's sleeping face, something in his stern expression softened. "He has your mother's chin," he observed quietly, "and her ears. Does he?" Tabitha asked, studying her son with new eyes. "I didn't realize." "Yes." Her father cleared his throat. "She would have been very proud of you, Tabitha." The words, simple as they were, healed something deep within her, a wound she had carried since her mother's death, a fear that she had somehow failed to live up to what her mother would have wanted. "Thank you," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. Harold stayed only a short while, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional atmosphere, but his visit marked another step in the tentative rebuilding of their relationship. As spring blossomed fully across the mountains, bringing new growth and warmth, the little family settled into a rhythm centered around Thomas's needs. Kieran took on more of the ranch work to allow Tabitha time to recover and care for their son. But he was also an eager and involved father, spending hours each day with Thomas cradled against his chest. One perfect May evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they sat together on the porch, Kieran in the rocking chair with Thomas asleep in his arms, Tabitha on the step beside them. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted, resting her head against Kieran's knee. "It feels almost unreal sometimes." "It's real," he assured her, his free hand stroking her hair. "We've built this together, Tabitha. A home, a family, a life." She looked out across the land that had become her home, remembering the desperate flight that had brought her here. "Do you ever think about that night, when you found my footprints in the snow?" "Often," he admitted. "I thank God every day that Shadow noticed them, that I decided to follow." "I was so afraid," she remembered. "Not just of freezing to death, but of everything, the future, my father being alone." "And now?" he asked, his voice gentle. She turned to look up at him, at their son nestled safely in his arms, and felt a profound peace settle in her heart. "Now I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tabitha realized that the journey that had begun with desperate footprints in the snow had led her not just to safety but to her true home, not a place, but the people she loved. In Kieran's steadfast love and their son's innocent trust, she had found what she had always sought but never believed possible: a family built on love, respect, and freedom. The footprints had long since melted away, but the path they had marked led forward into a future bright with promise, a future they would walk together, hand in hand, for all the days to come.